What if the story you're about to hear didn't just start with a misunderstanding, but with a demand so jarring, so wildly out of place, that even seasoned Hollywood professionals froze mid-sentence? And what if the very first person to call it out wasn't an executive or a producer or some anonymous studio staffer, but Lily Collins herself, the one actress everyone describes as graceful, diplomatic, and almost impossibly polite? That's where this story begins, with a moment so surreal that people who were in the room still talk about it in hushed tones, like they witnessed a plot twist unfold in real life. And the strangest part? It wasn't a scandal that built up slowly. It wasn't a whisper campaign. It wasn't tension that developed over weeks. It happened in the very first 30 seconds of Meghan Markle's return to Hollywood. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But let's slow down for a moment, because the truth is, this moment didn't come out of nowhere. If you zoom out just a little, you see a story that's been brewing for years. You see a woman who left Hollywood behind when she became a duchess, now attempting a dramatic comeback in the most competitive industry on earth. You see a studio, Amazon MGM, putting millions of dollars and its reputation on the line, betting that Meghan Markle's polarizing public image would translate into views, headlines, and global attention. And you see two actresses, Lily Collins and Brie Larson, women known for discipline, humility, and the kind of work ethic that keeps them out of scandals, suddenly thrown into the same project as someone who was bringing royal expectations to a workplace that doesn't recognize titles, ceremonies, or hierarchy. So before that shocking first meeting even began, there was already pressure in the air. Quiet pressure, invisible pressure, the kind that creeps into a room before the people do. Staff members were whispering, "Is she really coming?" Producers were adjusting their schedules. Assistants were triple-checking logistics. Even security was briefed, because nobody wanted to make a mistake. But the one question everyone kept repeating, almost with a shaky laugh, was, what version of Meghan Markle are we going to get today? The actress who once hustled for roles? The polished royal from charity engagements? Or the unpredictable public figure who has been criticized for treating staff poorly? It wasn't just curiosity, it was concern. Because a film set is a fragile ecosystem. One clash, one ego, one bad interaction can ripple across the entire production. And they all knew this project, close personal friends, mattered. It was supposed to be Amazon MGM's warm, brilliant, modern comedic gem. A film with heartfelt moments, witty dialogue, and a cast that could balance sharp humor with emotional depth. Lily Collins was already attached. A perfect fit, given her reputation for elevating scripts with subtle, grounded performances. Brie Larson signed on next, bringing charisma and edge. And then came Meghan, not as a cameo, not as a supporting role, but as one of the leads. That decision alone set off debates internally. Some executives loved the idea. Others predicted disaster. But none of them predicted the moment that would happen on day one. The moment that changed everything. Because when Meghan walked into that room, she didn't walk in like an actress joining a cast. She didn't walk in like a colleague ready to collaborate. No, according to multiple people present, she walked in like someone expecting ceremony, expecting acknowledgement, expecting something that simply does not exist in Hollywood, royal protocol. And that's when the room froze. The assistants who had been prepping notes, the producers who were ready to outline the script changes, even the catering staff in the hallway stopped moving. Because Meghan didn't just introduce herself. She introduced her title. Out loud. Slowly. Emphatically. Like she was expecting everyone to adjust their behavior instantly. Like she was resetting the entire tone of the meeting with one sentence. People exchanged glances. Some confused. Some offended. Some trying desperately to pretend everything was normal. But something in the air shifted. Something unspoken. Something uncomfortable. And before anyone else could react, Lily Collins, the person nobody expected to get involved, stepped forward. Calm, composed, firm, and she said something that would become the spark that lit the fuse. But hold on. We're getting ahead of ourselves again. Because before Lily could say anything, Meghan did something else. Something even more unexpected. Something that made people question whether she understood where she was. Something that pushed the atmosphere from awkward to tense. It was a gesture, a subtle one, but unmistakable. A gesture associated with royalty, not with filmmaking, not with creative collaboration, and definitely not with a group of people who had spent their lives working their way up the brutally competitive Hollywood ladder without ever asking anyone to bow, curtsy, or kneel. And here's the real twist. Some staff genuinely thought Meghan was joking at first. They waited for the punchline. They waited for the laugh, the wink, the just kidding. But it never came. Instead, Meghan's expression remained completely serious, intent, expectant, like she couldn't understand why nobody was doing anything. As if she didn't realize that the rules she lived under in the royal family did not follow her into this space. As if she believed that titles, royal titles, were universal currency. You would think someone would step in. Maybe a producer. Maybe a director. Maybe an executive. But everyone hesitated because everyone was confused. And into that silence stepped Lily Collins. The same Lily who grew up around Hollywood royalty, but never acted like she deserved special treatment. The same Lily who is known for being gracious, patient, quietly powerful. And what she said, according to insiders, wasn't rude. It wasn't unprofessional. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply so clear, so direct, so honest, that Meghan was momentarily stunned. It was the kind of sentence that people remember even years later because it spoke a truth nobody else in the room dared to articulate. But let's not reveal Lily's words yet, because to understand the impact, you need to understand the context. You need to understand why Amazon MGM was already nervous before this meeting. You need to understand why Meghan was balancing on a knife's edge without realizing it. You need to understand why one wrong move, one expectation that didn't belong, could derail an entire project. And to really understand that, you have to look at Meghan's Hollywood history. Not the glamorous interviews. Not the curated red carpet appearances. No, the behind-the-scenes reputation she had long before Buckingham Palace ever entered the picture. Because Meghan's early Hollywood reputation was a patchwork of praise and complaints. Yes, she was ambitious. Yes, she was hardworking. But she was also described as someone who expected special exceptions, someone who didn't always take direction well, someone who could be charming in public and cold in private. These weren't tabloid rumors. These were stories told by makeup artists, costume designers, assistants, people whose names never reach headlines, but whose experiences shaped the reality of a performer's reputation. Meghan didn't leave Hollywood with a spotless record, and Amazon MGM knew that. They were taking a risk. A massive one. Now imagine bringing that reputation into a modern, collaborative film environment where respect is everything. Imagine entering a room where actors are equals, where crew members expect professionalism, where titles don't matter, only talent, attitude, and teamwork. Imagine walking into that room with royal expectations. You can see the collision coming from miles away. A collision between Hollywood culture and monarchy culture. A collision between earned status and inherited status. A collision between people raised to collaborate and someone who spent years being addressed as a duchess. And this collision didn't just create awkwardness. It created fear. Yes, fear. Fear from staff who worried about being blamed. Fear from executives who worried about production delays. Fear from cast members who worried about being associated with a scandal before filming even started. Fear from Amazon MGM's PR team, who knew that one leaked moment could ignite social media firestorms instantly. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Meghan wasn't just walking into any project. She was walking into a project headlined by Lily Collins, someone beloved in the industry, someone trusted, someone seen as unshakable. Lily had built a career on grace, on humility, on talent. So when she saw behavior that clashed with the culture she protects on every set she steps onto, she reacted. Not with anger, not with theatrics, but with conviction. But before we get to her reaction, and trust me, you'll want to hold on to your seat for that moment. You need to understand the stakes on Meghan's side. Because Meghan wasn't just stepping into a film role. She was stepping into a comeback, a rebirth, an opportunity to rewrite her public image after years of controversy. This wasn't just another acting job. This was a chance to prove herself, to reclaim relevance, to show she could shine outside the royal bubble. She needed this project, desperately, and that desperation created pressure. Pressure that only intensified when she realized people in the room were not responding to her the way she expected. That's when ego, insecurity, and expectation collided. That's when things turned from uncomfortable to unforgettable. And that's when Lily Collins, the last person anyone imagined would slam someone, did the unthinkable. But before we reached that moment, something else happened. Something subtle. Something that added gasoline to an already burning fire. Meghan noticed the looks, the confusion, the hesitation. And instead of softening her approach, she doubled down. She clarified her expectation. Slowly, clearly, reiterating her title again and again, as if the repetition would force people to comply. The room fell silent. And that silence is the moment everything shifted. Because in that silence, Lily Collins made a decision. A decision that would define the rest of production. A decision that would send shockwaves through Amazon MGM. A decision that would follow Meghan everywhere she went on set. She stepped forward. She looked Meghan directly in the eyes. She opened her mouth. And she delivered the line that would change everything. What made Meghan Markle walk back into Hollywood with the certainty of someone who believed the industry had been waiting for her return? What gave her that unmistakable air, the kind of posture, the kind of confidence, the kind of barely concealed expectation that made even seasoned studio workers whisper, "She thinks she's royalty here too?" And the real question is this: why did Amazon MGM believe she was worth the gamble, especially when every person in that first meeting could already feel the tension building long before she even opened her mouth? Those questions matter because Meghan's return to Hollywood wasn't casual. It wasn't nostalgic. It wasn't some spontaneous creative impulse. No, it was calculated, deliberate, and fueled by something deeper than ambition. It was fueled by reclamation, reinvention, a hunger to prove something, not to Hollywood exactly, but to the world that had scrutinized her every move for almost a decade. She wasn't coming back as the actress from Suits. She wasn't coming back as the woman who once auditioned for small roles in daytime dramas. She believed she was returning as a global public figure, as someone who had lived inside palaces and walked beside kings, as someone whose name alone could command attention worldwide. But the irony, the contradiction that sat at the center of this entire comeback, was that Hollywood didn't see her that way. Not anymore. Hollywood hadn't paused in her absence. Hollywood hadn't circled back to ask, "Where's Meghan Markle? When will she return?" Hollywood moved on. It always moves on. It forgets. It forgives. It reinvents. And most importantly, it reshuffles the deck constantly. Stars rise. Stars fall. Audiences shift. The industry transforms with brutal speed. And when Meghan stepped away all those years ago, she stepped away from a world that had already replaced her before she even realized it. This is the contradiction that sets the stage for everything that would happen next. Meghan believed she was returning as someone elevated, someone transformed, someone above the system. But Hollywood saw her as someone outside the system, someone they weren't sure would fit in anymore. And that gap, that enormous gap between self-perception and industry reality, was the real pressure simmering beneath the surface on the day she walked into Amazon MGM headquarters. But before we dissect that first day, we need to look at the path that brought her back. Because Meghan's return wasn't simple, or smooth, or guaranteed. It was, in many ways, a last resort. After the royal split, after the Netflix projects, after the Spotify fallout, after the media storms, Meghan needed a new identity. A new lane. Something that could anchor her beyond interviews and controversies. And Hollywood, the place where she once dreamed of belonging, suddenly seemed like the ideal stage. But returning wasn't as easy as calling up an agent and booking auditions. The industry had questions. Big ones. Could she take direction? Could she collaborate? Would she bring drama? Would she overshadow a production with her royal baggage? Or worse, would she overshadow the work itself? Amazon MGM decided the gamble was worth taking, but not because of her acting alone. They wanted the headlines, the high curiosity factor, the social media engagement. Meghan Markle, back in a major Hollywood film, opposite two respected actresses, that was going to draw attention no matter what. And for a studio trying to dominate the streaming landscape, attention is currency. But attention also brings expectations. And expectations bring pressure. And pressure brings ego. Not in everyone, but in some people. People who believe their presence is a gift to the room rather than a contribution to a team. People who believe they've earned a permanent spotlight. People who believe respect should be automatic, not earned. And this is the version of Meghan some insiders feared would walk through the door. The question on everyone's mind wasn't can she act? It was how will she behave? And that question lingered for weeks leading up to her first day. Producers whispered about it. Assistants speculated about it. Crew members swapped stories about her reputation. And in the days before the meeting, you could feel the buildup in every hallway, every call sheet, every prep session. People weren't preparing for an actress. They were preparing for a presence. Meanwhile, Lily Collins had been the calm in the center of all this. Lily, who had already read the full script twice. Lily, who had met with the director to map out emotional arcs. Lily, who had memorized early lines weeks ahead of schedule because she believed in the project. Lily, who treated every crew member with polite, effortless respect. Lily, who had been raised around famous names but never once acted like fame entitled her to anything. That's why people trusted her. That's why producers sighed with relief when they learned she would be the film's anchor. She was the stability Meghan wasn't. Now enter Brie Larson, a force of talent. A woman known for intensity, discipline, and blunt honesty. Someone who doesn't tolerate nonsense on set. Brie was warned privately, not in dramatic terms, but enough to make her cautious. There's already energy around Meghan, an Amazon MGM insider told her. Brie didn't respond, but her raised eyebrow said everything. So when Meghan re-entered Hollywood, she wasn't stepping into an open-armed embrace. She was stepping into a cautious, calculated environment where everyone already had whispered concerns. And that's why her entrance mattered so much. Because in Hollywood, in any creative space, first impressions can shape everything that follows. She didn't walk in quietly. She didn't walk in humbly. She didn't walk in like someone grateful to return. She walked in like someone continuing a reign. Someone expecting a ritual. Someone expecting acknowledgement that simply did not exist here. And this wasn't just confidence. It was performance. It was posture. It was ceremony. It was, to some observers, entitlement. She had an entourage. She had rehearsed motions. She addressed people with a formality that belonged in a palace, not a studio. And she waited for something that was never going to happen. This is where everything begins to unravel. Because as Meghan scanned the room, something in her eyes shifted. Confusion, then offense. As if she couldn't believe what she was witnessing, or rather, what she wasn't witnessing. No curtsy, no bowed heads, no Your Royal Highness. Just Hollywood professionals waiting to begin a meeting. Imagine the weight of that moment. Imagine expecting reverence and receiving neutrality. Imagine anticipating ceremony and getting silence. Imagine believing a title travels with you everywhere, and suddenly realizing the room doesn't care. But instead of adjusting, she doubled down. And that's when she said it. That's when she introduced herself not as Meghan, not as an actress, but as a duchess, out loud, with absolute seriousness. The room froze. Assistants stared at one another. Producers stiffened. A writer nearly dropped her pen. Because no one knew what to do. No one knew what was expected. No one knew whether this was a joke or an order. And as this moment hung in the air, heavy and awkward and tense, Meghan noticed something else. Something that made her posture harden. Lily Collins' expression. Calm. Neutral. Unmoved. Lily wasn't disrespectful. She wasn't mocking. She wasn't irritated. But she wasn't indulging Meghan either. And that neutrality, that absence of deference, was enough for Meghan to interpret it as a slight. A challenge. An insult. Her jaw tightened. Her shoulders straightened. She announced her title again. Slower this time. Clearer. Less introduction. More reminder. And that's the exact moment when the room collectively realized the stakes had shifted. That this wasn't going to be one awkward moment quickly forgotten. This was the beginning of a pattern. A dynamic. A collision. A collision Lily Collins refused to let happen quietly. Because Lily, in her calm, poised, unwavering way, decided she would set a tone before Meghan could set one herself. She took one small step forward. She prepared to say the sentence that would ripple through the entire production. And she opened her mouth. What she said next would not only redefine the atmosphere in that room, it would change the fate of the entire film. What do you say? Honestly, what words come to your mind when someone stands in front of you and demands a level of deference that doesn't belong in the room? What do you do when the atmosphere shifts from professional to surreal in a matter of seconds? And why was Lily Collins, of all people, The one who couldn't stay silent. That's the question everyone in that Amazon MGM conference room would later argue about. Because Lily wasn't the loudest person there. She wasn't the highest ranking. She wasn't the one with the most power. But she was the one who understood something Meghan Markle didn't. That respect on a set doesn't come from titles, backgrounds, or global notoriety. It comes from behavior. It comes from humility. It comes from the willingness to be part of a team, not the center of it. So when Lily stepped forward, the entire room held its breath. Not because they expected drama. Lily wasn't known for that. But because she was the last person anyone imagined would challenge Meghan Markle directly. Lily, who never raised her voice on set. Lily, who treated interns the same way she treated executives. Lily, who avoided gossip, confrontation, and ego-fueled conflicts. If she was stepping in, something had gone very, very wrong. Let's rewind the moment properly. Meghan had just introduced herself with her title. Very clearly, very deliberately. She had repeated it when the room didn't react the way she anticipated. She had waited for some grand gesture that would never come. And when Lily remained completely calm, completely neutral, completely unshaken, Meghan interpreted it as defiance. The tension in the air had already reached an uncomfortable peak. A kind of thick silence that feels almost cinematic. The kind of silence that happens right before a character says something that changes the plot. Meghan's expression wasn't aggressive, but it carried an unmistakable weight. The weight of someone used to being acknowledged without question. Someone used to being recognized without hesitation. Someone used to walking into rooms where everyone stood a little straighter. But Hollywood is not the royal world. And Lily knew this. She saw the confusion, the discomfort, the nervous glances between staff. She saw producers silently asking one another whether they should intervene. She saw assistants shrinking into themselves, afraid of accidentally offending a duchess. And she saw Meghan interpreting the silence as disrespect rather than shock. So Lily spoke. Calmly. Precisely. Professionally. Meghan, she said. Not Duchess. Not Your Royal Highness. Just Meghan. That single choice, that name, without embellishment, made Meghan blink. It was a tiny verbal correction. A subtle reminder. A refusal to play into the theatrics. And then Lily continued, choosing her words with the kind of quiet strength only someone raised in Hollywood could master. We're all equals here. No one has to curtsy. No one has to use titles. We're just here to work. Together. The room didn't breathe. Meghan didn't respond. And for a moment, a long, crackling moment, it felt like time stopped. Like the entire production hung on how Meghan would receive that sentence. Because Lily hadn't insulted her. She hadn't attacked her. She hadn't embarrassed her. She had simply anchored the room back to reality. But reality wasn't what Meghan expected. You could see the flicker, that instant of disbelief, in Meghan's eyes. Not anger. Not yet. But surprise. The kind of surprise that comes from being reminded that a title doesn't hold power everywhere. The kind of surprise that comes from realizing the dynamics she relied on in royal life didn't automatically transfer into Hollywood. This was the moment people in the room still talk about. The moment that would later become the foundation of every rumor, every leak, every whispered recap of the day Lily Collins put Meghan Markle in her place. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. Meghan didn't fire back. She didn't defend herself. She didn't assert her title again. Instead, she stood there, processing. You could almost see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The shifting of gears, the recalibration of expectations. For someone who had spent years being addressed formally, the casualness of Hollywood professionalism wasn't just foreign, it was destabilizing. But Meghan wasn't the only one affected. Because right after Lily spoke, every person in the room felt something new. Not tension, not fear, but relief. A rush of it, subtle but real. The kind of relief that comes when someone says what everyone else is too afraid to articulate. Lily had reset the dynamic. She had set the boundary Meghan didn't realize she was crossing, or perhaps didn't want to realize. But while the room exhaled, Meghan inhaled. And her next breath changed the room again. She straightened her posture, adjusted her sleeve, and in a steady, carefully controlled voice, she replied, I appreciate that. But my title is part of who I am. She didn't drop it. She didn't let it go. She didn't lean into the team dynamic. She simply clarified her stance. a stance that was already creating waves long before filming began. But here's where the emotional contradiction deepened, because Meghan didn't sound villainous. She didn't sound arrogant. She sounded defensive, like she felt her identity slipping through her fingers. Like she was suddenly aware that the thing she once believed made her special was becoming a point of controversy. Like she understood, perhaps for the first time in years, that a title can isolate as much as it elevates. That defensiveness didn't go unnoticed. Lily observed it. Producers observed it. Even a few assistants who were previously intimidated found themselves feeling something unexpected: sympathy. But sympathy doesn't erase protocol breaches, nor does it resolve tension. And Lily knew the room needed clarity, not emotion. So she nodded politely, offered a small smile, and replied, "Of course. Just know you don't need it here. We're all here because of the work." That sentence, that final, elegant boundary, is the one Meghan took personally. From the outside, it sounded diplomatic. But to Meghan, it felt like a demotion. A reminder that Hollywood would not bow. A reminder that her royal chapter didn't guarantee special treatment. A reminder that the dynamic she expected, the reverence, the carefulness, the ceremonial courtesy, simply didn't exist in this world. And that's when the real shift happened. Not out loud, not in gestures, but internally, within Meghan. Something in her eyes hardened. Not anger, not fury, something quieter, something more strategic. The look of someone who just realized the hierarchy she assumed was automatic would need to be fought for, or asserted, or demanded. Meanwhile, Lily sensed the shift. And though she remained composed, she understood something crucial. This was only the beginning. Because Meghan didn't step back. She didn't soften. She didn't adapt. She pivoted. And that pivot, subtle as it was, set off a cascade of consequences that would ripple through every rehearsal, every table read, every on-set interaction for the rest of pre-production. At this point, every person in that room had a different interpretation. Some thought Meghan felt embarrassed. Some thought she felt insulted. Some thought she felt cornered. But one thing was undeniably clear. The tone had been set. Lily had established equality. Meghan had established her expectation. And Amazon MGM had just witnessed a collision of worlds the script wasn't ready for. But here's the twist most people don't know. Lily wasn't the first person Meghan alienated in those early moments. Before the meeting even began, before Meghan made her entrance, before the title declaration, something quietly happened behind closed doors that would later blow up into one of the biggest internal disputes Amazon MGM had faced in months. Something involving staff. Something involving respect. Something involving a request, or, as some claimed, a demand, that left team members privately furious. And that incident was the domino that fell before Lily Collins ever opened her mouth. Because while the world remembers Lily's line, the truth is, Meghan's behavior started earlier. And what happened before that meeting is what truly set the upcoming conflict in motion. But what was it? What exactly did Meghan say to the staff before stepping into that room? Why did 3 assistants file quiet complaints to a senior producer within the hour? And what phrase did Meghan use that made one staff member whisper, "She really thinks we're courtiers?" Those answers are coming. And they're far worse than what happened in the conference room. Because if you thought the title introduction was shocking, wait until you hear what Meghan demanded before she even walked through the door. What exactly did Meghan Markle say? Not in the conference room, not in front of Lily Collins, not in front of producers, but before she even walked through the door? What could she possibly have done in those private, unfilmed minutes that made assistants exchange looks of disbelief, whisper into headsets, or step aside with a mixture of confusion and embarrassment? And why did those quiet behind-the-scenes moments light the fuse that eventually exploded in front of Lily Collins? Let's pick up exactly where we left off. At the sound of that shocking revelation, 3 assistants had quietly filed complaints before Meghan even entered the meeting. That's where Chapter 2 begins. And the truth behind it is not just surprising, it's foreshadowing. Because what happened in that hallway is the real beginning of the story. It's the moment Meghan stepped back into Hollywood, not as an actress, not as a collaborator, not as a colleague, but as someone expecting a royal reception in a world that doesn't do royal receptions. Let's step into that hallway now. Picture it clearly. A long, polished corridor inside Amazon MGM headquarters. Neutral-colored walls. Fluorescent lights humming softly. A stack of branded script binders on a rolling cart. Assistants moving briskly between rooms, carrying water bottles, call sheets, scheduling notes. It's the last place on Earth you'd expect a royal protocol moment. But suddenly the atmosphere shifts. Meghan's entourage arrives first. Not 5 seconds ahead of her. Not even 10. But a full 3 minutes before Meghan appears. And they're not strolling casually. They're not chatting about the project. They're not quietly preparing Meghan for the meeting. They're inspecting, surveying, assessing. A staffer named John, we'll keep his name generic, later told colleagues he felt like he was being looked at by airport security instead of production assistants. Another assistant joked, nervously, not confidently. Are we supposed to stand up straighter? What's happening? Nobody was rude. Nobody was panicking. But everybody could feel it. When Meghan's team arrived, they acted like the space had to adjust to her, not the other way around. That's when the first comment happened. According to 2 people who later reported it, one of Meghan's aides asked in a firm but controlled tone, "Has anyone briefed the staff on proper forms of address?" The assistant nearest to him blinked, confused. Proper forms of what? Proper forms of address, the aide repeated, as if speaking to someone who didn't understand basic vocabulary. The assistant thought he meant internal company titles. Producer, director, executive. But then the aide clarified. She prefers to be addressed as Duchess of Sussex upon arrival. The assistant laughed. Not mockingly, but in the way you laugh when you think someone is telling a joke you don't quite understand yet. But the aide didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply said, "It's important." That assistant wasn't the only one rattled. Another staffer standing nearby had the same reaction, confusion sliding into stunned realization. And before they could even respond, the aide added, "She also expects a respectful greeting when she enters." Respectful greeting? In Hollywood, that usually means say hello. Not here. Because the aide, according to one assistant who witnessed it, clarified with a gesture. A very specific, unmistakable gesture. A half curtsy. A small dip. Subtle, but pointed. As though demonstrating what he believed should happen when Meghan walked in the room. That was the moment the hallway went cold. Not angry. Not hostile. Just cold. Because every assistant knew exactly what that meant. Meghan wasn't entering as a peer. She was entering as royalty. And that expectation, that assumption, created the first internal rupture. One assistant later described the feeling like this. It wasn't even that she wanted to be treated like royalty. It was that she assumed we were already trained to treat her like royalty. You can imagine how that landed. Hollywood has its egos. It has its divas. It has its unstable, unmanageable personalities. But royalty? That's new. A third assistant, already stressed from a morning filled with scheduling delays, overheard the exchange and immediately texted her supervisor. "Is this serious? Are we supposed to do something? Please advise." She got no reply, but the tension was climbing. Then came the second moment, even more bizarre, that sealed the decision to report the issue. When Meghan finally approached, flanked by 2 aides, walking down the hallway with that unmistakable stride, one assistant stepped forward to greet her the way he'd greet any actor. "Hi Meghan, welcome." He didn't even finish the sentence. One of Meghan's aides cut him off mid-word. "It's Duchess." Just like that. No smile. No apology. Just correction. Sharp. Clean. Authoritative. But Meghan herself didn't correct the aide. She didn't soften the moment. She didn't clarify her preference. She just kept walking. And that silence, that lack of intervention, sent a very different message than if she had spoken herself. It said, yes, this is the expectation. Yes, Hollywood would bend. Yes, staff would adjust. Yes, her title mattered here too. But it didn't. Not to them. Not in this world. Not in this building. And that's when the assistants exchanged looks that meant, this is going to be a problem. Minutes later, all 3 sent internal messages to their supervisors documenting what they'd heard. Not because they wanted to start trouble, but because they worried trouble was already starting. Meanwhile, Meghan kept walking, unaware of the chain reaction unfolding behind her. She didn't see the unsettled glances. She didn't see the whispered side conversations. She didn't see the internal Slack messages lighting up with variations of, "What do we do? Are we supposed to bow? Is this a protocol thing? Help." And then Meghan reached the meeting room. The room where Lily Collins was already seated. The room where producers were waiting. The room where everything would escalate. But before Meghan crossed that threshold, one assistant, the same one who had been corrected, asked quietly, "Should we curtsy?" Another replied, sotto voce, "If I curtsy at work, I'm quitting." The door opened. Meghan entered. And that's where the story we began earlier picks up again, with the silence, the room freezing, the shock, the expectations colliding with reality. But now you understand the truth. By the time Meghan introduced herself with her title, the staff was already rattled, already uncomfortable, already discussing the strange protocol they'd been told to follow. Which means Lily Collins didn't witness a single isolated incident. She walked straight into the fallout of something already spiraling. She saw the stiffness. She saw the staff members trying to stay professional while being visibly uncomfortable. She saw the imbalance, the hierarchy, the fear, and Lily, calm, grounded, steady Lily, knew that if she didn't speak up, this dynamic would poison the entire production. That's why she spoke. That's why she challenged the moment. That's why she said what she said. And that's why Meghan's reply landed like a crack in the room's foundation. But the meeting wasn't done. Not even close. Because while tension filled the air, something even more explosive was about to happen. A single moment. A single sentence. A single interaction that made Lily Collins go from quietly setting boundaries to openly confronting Meghan Markle in front of the entire room. And it wasn't about titles. And it wasn't about curtsies. It was something far more personal, far more raw, far more revealing. You're not ready for what Meghan said next. Because this next moment, is what turned tension into conflict. What do you say to someone who walks into a room already offended? How do you reason with someone who feels disrespected before the meeting even begins? And how do you respond when a person who believes they've been denied the treatment they deserve decides to take that frustration out on the wrong person? Because that, according to every insider who later recounted the story, is exactly what happened next. Meghan Markle didn't just come into the meeting tense. She didn't just come in expecting hierarchy. She came in primed for confrontation, convinced she'd already been wronged by the studio staff. And the person who became the target of that frustration? Lily Collins. Not because Lily did anything wrong. Not because Lily disrespected her. Not because Lily challenged her title. But because Lily represented something Meghan didn't have. Grace. Acceptance. Respect. Hollywood credibility. The quiet kind of authority that comes from earning your place over years of professionalism, not inheriting status through marriage. And when Meghan realized Lily wasn't going to adjust to the title, wasn't going to play along with the royal framing, wasn't going to bow, figuratively or literally, something snapped. Not outwardly, not dramatically, not in a way that looked explosive, but in a way that shifted the tone of the entire meeting. Let's go inside that room. Let's revisit the moment right after Lily calmly reminded everyone. We're all equals here. No one needs to curtsy. No one needs to use titles. We're just here to work. Together. The room exhaled. Producers relaxed ever so slightly. Assistants regained their footing. But Meghan? She stiffened. Her smile, polite but tight, didn't reach her eyes. And then, in a voice that carried a hint of tension beneath its smooth delivery, she replied, "My title is part of my identity. I would appreciate if that was respected." A perfectly reasonable sentence on its own. Except it wasn't. Not in context. Not when her team had just asked staff to curtsy. Not when assistants had been corrected harshly just minutes earlier. Not when everyone in the room already felt pressured to acknowledge something they didn't need to acknowledge. So Lily nodded, gave a diplomatic smile, left the boundary where it was. But Meghan wasn't done. Because this wasn't just about a title. This was about control. And losing control, in front of peers, was something Meghan Markle wasn't prepared for. That's when the conversation shifted. The director attempted to move forward, clapping his hands lightly as if to reset the energy. "All right, let's get started. We have a lot to cover." But Meghan cut in. Softly, sharply. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to address something." The director hesitated. Producers exchanged quick glances. Lily looked up, alert but calm. And Meghan continued, "I was told the staff here would be briefed on proper protocol. Clearly that didn't happen." A silence so thick it felt physical settled over the room. Proper protocol. The phrase hit like a dropped glass. Because remember, nobody in the room had been told anything. The aides acted independently. Staff were blindsided. And now Meghan was framing the situation as an internal failure, not a misunderstanding, not a miscommunication, but a failure. Lily's expression didn't change at all, but her eyes did. They sharpened, not aggressively, just enough to signal. So this is what we're doing. Meghan wasn't finished. She turned slightly, not directly at Lily, but in her direction enough to make the implication undeniable, and said, "It's important for a production to create an environment of respect. And respect starts with acknowledging who people are, what they've earned. Earned. That word cut through the air like a blade. Because Meghan had not earned her title. She'd acquired it, married into it, left the institution behind, and now was insisting Hollywood treat it like an achievement. The contradiction was too glaring for Lily to ignore. Still, she didn't interrupt. She let Meghan finish. Because Lily always lets people finish. But what Meghan said next, that was the moment insiders say made Lily Collins' shoulders go rigid for the first and only time that day. Meghan said, "I noticed. Certain individuals didn't seem prepared to address me correctly. I'm hoping that won't be an issue moving forward. Certain individuals." There it was. A public call-out. Vague enough to be deniable. Direct enough to be personal. And every eye in the room drifted toward Lily, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. Because Meghan's tone made it clear, she felt challenged. And she believed someone was responsible. The director tried to soften the moment again. "We're all here to collaborate." But Meghan continued, talking over him this time. "Collaboration is built on the foundation of acknowledging people's roles. Roles. Titles. Identity. Hierarchy." This wasn't settling. It was escalating. And Lily, after giving Meghan every opportunity to shift the tone, finally spoke. Not harshly, not dramatically, just with a quiet, unwavering firmness that sliced straight through the noise. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. Her voice calm, steady, unapologetic. "We weren't told there would be royal protocol. We weren't told we needed to address anyone in a certain way. And if we had been told, the conversation would be very different. But this is a film set. Everyone here is a professional. Everyone here earned their place." That last sentence was not an accident. Everyone here earned their place. In Hollywood, that's a truth as sacred as anything in the royal world. Meghan blinked. A flicker, barely visible, but unmistakable, because Lily had just articulated what everyone in the room had been thinking. Not cruelly, not viciously, just factually. Meghan inhaled, held it, exhaled, then said, with a softness so deliberate it felt like a warning, "I'm aware of how sets work, but I'm also aware of my identity, and I won't apologize for having a title." Lily nodded again. Kind, polite, but with undeniable steel beneath it. "No one asked you to apologize," she said. "We're just asking you to be part of the team." There it was. The boundary Meghan couldn't get past. Because being part of the team meant letting go of the expectation of special treatment. Being part of the team meant recognizing that Hollywood doesn't curtsy. Being part of the team meant accepting that Amazon MGM hired her as an actress, not a duchess. And Meghan, who had spent years in a world built on ceremony and deference, wasn't ready for that. So she tried one more time. A final attempt to reclaim authority. She lifted her chin slightly and said, "I just hope my presence is respected appropriately." And Lily? She didn't break. She didn't flinch. But she did lean in, just a fraction, and replied, "Respect is earned here through how we treat each other. Not through titles. You'll get plenty of respect, just not the ceremonial kind." A producer put a hand over their mouth to hide a reaction. Another tapped a pen nervously. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Meghan's eyes narrowed the slightest bit, not in anger, but in realization. She'd been challenged, not publicly shamed, not humiliated. Challenged, fairly, directly, from someone she couldn't dismiss. But then, just when the tension felt ready to snap, something unexpected happened. Meghan turned away from Lily, lifted her head, and said to no one in particular, "Let's just move on." A surrender? Not quite. More like a strategic retreat. She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. But she was done fighting in that moment. The director took the cue immediately. "Okay," he said too brightly. "Let's look at the character outlines." The room tried to reassemble itself. But the energy was permanently changed. And Meghan, though she appeared composed, was simmering. Because Lily wasn't the only one she felt challenged by. As the meeting continued, as scripts were discussed, as scenes were outlined, insiders noticed something subtle but unmistakable. Meghan kept glancing at Lily, not with hostility, but with calculation, as if she was reassessing her, as if she were cataloging the dynamic, as if she had decided Lily was now her biggest obstacle. And she wasn't wrong, because Lily wasn't just the moral center of the cast. She was the standard, the example, the equilibrium, and Meghan could feel it. Which is why she said what she said next, the moment that officially escalated everything beyond repair. Meghan turned during a script discussion and made a comment so casually sharp, so quietly loaded, that Lily Collins' expression changed instantly. A comment that had nothing to do with titles, nothing to do with protocol, nothing to do with formality. A comment about Lily's career, Lily's talent, Lily's credibility. A comment that insiders say was the moment everything turned hostile. And that comment, you're not ready for how bold it was, or how personal, or how shockingly unnecessary. Because Meghan didn't just push back. She took a shot, a real one. And Lily Collins was done playing polite after that. What kind of person sits quietly through a clash, regains her composure, waits for the meeting to move on, and then chooses that exact moment, the moment when everyone is trying to reset the energy, to deliver a subtle, surgical strike? Who waits until the room is distracted, until the tension has softened just enough, until everyone's guard has lowered, and then drops a comment so precise, so intentionally cutting, that it doesn't just reignite the conflict, it redefines it. According to every insider present that day, that person was Meghan Markle, and the target was Lily Collins. Not her title, not her boundary setting, not her calm correction, but her career. And it happened so casually, so softly, so elegantly disguised as an observation, that some people in the room didn't realize what had happened until Lily's posture changed, not dramatically, but decisively. Like someone had just touched a nerve you weren't supposed to touch. Let's go back into that meeting room, the one now thick with that kind of wary, uncomfortable stillness that follows a confrontation everyone pretends didn't happen. The director flipped open the script binder again. Producers adjusted their notes. Lily smoothed her blouse and focused on the table. Meghan crossed her legs, back straight, chin slightly raised, the posture of someone who believed she'd regained her upper hand. They began reviewing character arcs, discussing comedic beats, tone, timing, where emotional weight fell. It was the sort of collaborative discussion that could either build chemistry or expose fractures. And in this case, it exposed the deepest fracture yet. It began innocently enough. The director turned to Lily and said, "Lily, your character Sarah has the emotional pivot in Act 2. I'm thinking we should soften the comedy in that scene and lean into your dramatic instincts." Everyone nodded. Lily smiled with that warm, self-effacing gratitude she's known for. "Of course," she said, "happy to adjust anything you need." But then, with the timing of someone who had been waiting for the exact moment, attention was on Lily. Meghan leaned back casually in her chair and said, "Oh, dramatic scenes are where you feel most comfortable, right? Since comedy isn't really your strong suit." The room stopped, as if someone had pulled the oxygen out. Because that was not a question. It was a statement, a surgical critique of Lily Collins' entire comedic range, delivered in front of the director, producers, and fellow cast. Lily blinked, not in confusion, but in disbelief. Because Meghan had done the one thing no one expected. She had taken a personal jab. No title involved. No protocol. No royalty. For the first time since entering the room, Meghan had attacked something that actually mattered to Lily, her craft. And if Hollywood has one sacred rule, aside from respecting the crew, it's this. You do not insult another actor's talent in front of the team. It's unspoken, universal, and Meghan had just broken that rule with a single, silky sentence. The director hesitated, looking between them. One producer actually shifted forward in their seat, as if to intervene. But Lily didn't react. Not yet. She inhaled slowly, the kind of inhale that says, "I'm giving you one chance to rethink what you just said." Meghan didn't rethink it. She doubled down. "Comedy's tricky," she added lightly, sipping her water. "Some actors are just naturally better at drama." You know, the way she said it, there was a sweetness to it. A softness. The kind of tone someone uses when pretending they're giving a compliment while twisting the knife underneath. Brie Larson, who had been quietly observing the entire dynamic since she arrived, raised her eyes slowly and looked at Meghan like she was trying to calculate whether this was ignorance or strategy. Lily, still composed, responded carefully. I don't think I've ever struggled with comedy. Different genres, yes, but I've always handled both. Meghan tilted her head, smiled. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, she replied. I just meant that some people are naturally funnier than others. It's not a bad thing. Silence. Because what she had just implied wasn't subtle anymore. She was implying Lily Collins wasn't funny. That she wasn't suited for a comedic lead. That Amazon MGM had miscast her. And worst of all, she said it as if she were doing Lily a favor. Bree shifted in her chair, her expression sharpening. One producer cleared their throat. Another scribbled something on the margin of their notes, even though nothing needed scribbling. Everyone was silently praying Lily wouldn't rise to the bait. But Lily wasn't rising. Not yet. She was calculating. Because this wasn't about comedy. This was about dominance. Meghan was testing her, probing for weakness, trying to reassert control after Lily had set that boundary earlier. And Lily, raised in the industry, trained by years of dealing with every type of ego imaginable, recognized the move instantly. So instead of confronting Meghan head-on, she did something far more strategic. She turned to the director, calmly, professionally, and said, if you want the scene to have more comedic tone, I can absolutely shift my delivery. But my range has always included both drama and comedy. I trust your vision. The director nodded gratefully, relieved. But Meghan wasn't done. She leaned in slightly, not toward the director, not toward the producers, toward Lily. And she whispered, just loud enough for the row to hear. It's okay. Not everyone can be naturally charismatic. Lily's face didn't change, not outwardly. But inside the room, people felt the shift, the snap of a line being crossed. Because Lily Collins is known for many things. Professionalism, warmth, kindness. But she is also known for one core trait inherited from her father, Phil Collins. When she is disrespected, she does not forget. And she does not stay quiet. The director, attempting to keep the meeting from imploding, jumped in again. Let's go to Meghan's character next. But Lily spoke. Not loudly. Not sharply, but with a tone so clean, so controlled, so scalpel precise that everyone straightened in their seats like students being corrected by a professor. Meghan, she said, if you have concerns about my comedic ability, you can bring them to the director, not to me in front of the entire team. Meghan blinked, caught, embarrassed. But she didn't back down. I wasn't criticizing, she said, her voice a little too soft to be sincere. I was just being honest. Lily nodded once. Honesty is welcome, she replied. Undermining your co-star in a professional setting is not. The room went silent again, but this time, the silence didn't belong to Meghan. It belonged to Lily. Because Lily Collins wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't defensive. She was clear, firm, immovable. And that, insiders say, was the moment Meghan realized she'd misjudged her. She'd assumed Lily, with her quiet demeanor and gentle presence, would be easy to push. She was wrong. Very, very wrong. Meghan's expression tightened again, not with rage, but with something far more telling. Calculation. Assessment. A mental note. And although the meeting moved on, or tried to, the tone was permanently altered. Meghan participated, but with clipped answers. Lily stayed focused but cool. Brie Larson kept glancing at both women with a kind of quiet, simmering disbelief, mentally preparing herself for future chaos. Because everyone in the room felt it. The tension wasn't temporary. It wasn't going to fade. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of a full-scale conflict. And the studio would soon find itself caught in the middle. Because Meghan's confidence had been punctured. Her authority had been challenged. And now, she had something to prove. Not to the world, but to Lily. But the most shocking part? This wasn't even the worst moment of the day. Because while the meeting was spiraling, while Meghan was clashing with Lily, while Brie was observing silently, something else was happening. Something that would turn this from a personal conflict into a production-wide crisis. A staff member, one who'd been instructed to curtsy, corrected harshly, and dismissed, had already contacted Amazon MGM's HR liaison. Not with a complaint. Not with an accusation. With a warning. A warning that said, there's a problem with Meghan, and it's going to affect the entire production. And that warning would soon reach the floor above them, the executive office, where someone would make a decision that transformed this entire story. A decision that would drag Amazon MGM leadership into the conflict. A decision that would force Meghan into a conversation she could not control. A decision that would eventually lead to the incident the studio tried desperately to bury. Because if you think Meghan's comment about Lily's talent was shocking, wait until you hear what happened next, when the executive stepped in. What happens inside a studio when the calm, polished front of professionalism cracks? Even for a second. What does a company like Amazon MGM do when whispers from the hallway turn into warnings, when private discomfort turns into documented concern, and when the actress at the center of an expensive, high-profile project becomes a risk before a single camera has rolled? And most importantly, what happens when executives who were already nervous about hiring Meghan Markle receive a message that confirms their worst fears? Because that's exactly what happened next. And according to insiders, this moment, not the curtsy request, not the title demand, not even Meghan's jab at Lily Collins, was the turning point. The moment Amazon MGM realized the problem wasn't going to resolve itself. The moment they stepped in. The moment the situation transformed from an awkward interpersonal issue into an internal crisis that needed intervention. Let's go upstairs. Let's step into the executive suite, the quiet, glass-walled world where meetings shape careers, reputations, budgets, and futures. Phones don't ring loudly up there. People don't raise their voices. Everything is calm, measured, calculated. So when the internal notification popped up, a message flagged urgent, pre-production conduct concern. It didn't ring alarms immediately. Not until they read the details. Not until they realized the issue wasn't about scheduling, or paperwork, or a minor miscommunication. It was about behavior. Behavior connected to their most controversial casting decision. Meghan Markle. The message, according to sources, was written with the careful neutrality of someone who didn't want to get anyone fired but also needed leadership to understand. This is a problem now, not later. It summarized the hallway incident, the curtsy demonstration, the correction of staff, the tension in the meeting room, but it also included one sentence that changed the entire tone of the situation. This is creating fear and discomfort among staff, and it is affecting the ability to collaborate. Fear, discomfort, collaboration being affected. Those words matter. Those words activate protocols. Those words require documentation. And those words force executives to step in before things escalate into formal HR violations, or worse, leaks to the press. Especially when the celebrity involved has a public image already steeped in controversy. So within minutes, an internal discussion began. Not panicked, not dramatic, just deeply, quietly concerned. One executive reportedly said, "We can't have this on day one. If it's this bad now, what happens when filming starts?" Another added, "She's not royalty here. We cannot let this affect the film's culture." A third, the most cautious, warned, "If this leaks, it becomes a PR disaster." Ah yes, the leak. Because Hollywood isn't a sealed vault. Assistants talk, crew talk, publicists talk, and insiders knew that if this story got out, if it reached tabloids, blogs, social media, the studio would be painted as either incompetent or complicit. Neither option was acceptable. So the executives made a choice. A collective, deliberate decision. We need to intervene. Not with punishment. Not with public embarrassment. But with a conversation. A firm, carefully controlled, diplomatically phrased conversation designed to reset expectations before the situation spiraled further. That's when they called the director. Quietly. Privately. Pulling him out of the meeting room under the pretext of checking in about scheduling. Once he was in the hallway, they told him exactly what had been reported. His eyes widened. Not because he was shocked. He'd already felt the tension, but because he hadn't realized the hallway incident had been that bad. Executives told him, "We can't ignore this. You need to speak with her after the meeting." He swallowed, nodded, looked back toward the conference room as if bracing himself. But the executives weren't finished. They added, "And you need to be clear with her. Hollywood is collaborative. She cannot expect royal protocol here." He hesitated again. Because directors aren't HR managers. They aren't disciplinarians. They're creative leaders. And the last thing any director wants is to begin a long production by confronting a cast member especially one with global fame. But he had no choice. He returned to the room with a forced smile and a thin layer of stress clinging to his expression, stress that Lily noticed instantly, and Bree noticed 2 seconds later. Meghan noticed nothing. She was still recentering herself post-conflict, still recalibrating, still silently sharpening whatever narrative she was constructing in her mind about what had just happened with Lily. The meeting resumed. Script notes, character motivation, scene structure. But the director's responses were shorter, tighter, distracted, because he knew what was coming. And what was coming would change the energy of the entire production for days. Not long after, the meeting finally ended. People stood, stretched, gathered their notes. The room exhaled again. Lily spoke to a producer quietly. Bree packed her binder. Assistants cleared half-full water bottles off the table. Meghan remained seated, back straight, posture perfect, waiting as if expecting people to approach her. The director approached instead. "Hey, Meghan," he said lightly. "Could we chat for a minute in my office?" Meghan smiled. Of course. She stood, gathered her things, walked with that same royal calmness down the hallway. But once the door closed behind them, once they were out of sight and out of hearing range, the tone shifted. The director wasn't unkind. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't confrontational. But he was clear, direct, measured. And according to someone familiar with that conversation, he opened with, "Hollywood doesn't follow royal protocol." Meghan blinked, taken aback. He continued. "The team wasn't aware of any expectations involving titles or greetings. That can't be part of